Greetings and welcome to Mount Olympus. I am Hercules Invictus, and tonight I am proud to bring you Lynne Miceli of the ARE of NYC. Greetings and welcome.
Greetings, Hercules. Thank you. Thank you so much. And so tonight, I'm delighted to present my guest, who is Robyn Marie Butt. And she will be talking about Edgar Cayce's story of the origin of the human race. So welcome, Robyn.
Thank you so much. It's just a delight, Lynn. I'm greatly looking forward to this.
Me too. So to tell you a little bit about Robyn before we start asking her questions. Robyn is a native of Ontario, Canada, but she's joining us from her new home, which is on beautiful Vancouver Island in British Columbia, over on the West Coast. Robyn has been a practicing professional psychic counselor for 30 years, giving readings in person or by Zoom, and her readings address personal, spiritual, family, work, pet, relationship, whatever, with a specialty in detailed past life readings. She's also an experienced ghost whisperer, which I think we'll have to talk about that another time. But some of her training, much of her training occurred within the context of an Edgar Cayce Search for God study group. And she teaches and speaks on topics relating to spirituality, psychic readings, psychic realities, and the work of Edgar Cayce, with a special fondness for the Cayce stories about this life of Jesus. In her parallel career, she is a 40-year professional writer of poetry, fiction, and creative nonfiction. She's been a professional arts journalist and critic, and is a playwright who served as writer-in-residence at several Toronto theaters. Her media dramas have been produced by CBC, that's Canadian Broadcasting for all us US folks, and CBC Radio and CBC TV. She's also a visual artist. So Robyn's a true Renaissance woman. But our focus today is on Robert as an expert on the Edgar Cayce readings. So we should probably also explain very briefly who Edgar Cayce was, just in case there's someone out there who doesn't know. Edgar Cayce was an American psychic and mystic who lived from 1877 to 1945. He gave over 14,000 psychic readings on topics that ranged from health and healing to meditation and spiritual growth to reincarnation, ancient cultures, prophecies for the future, and all kinds of things in between. And the ARE, which we'll probably be mentioning somewhat, is the organization that was formed to preserve and present the Cayce information. So, getting back to our topic, the origin of the human race, according to Edgar Cayce. So, Robyn, the way Cayce tells it, we were not created as physical beings, but we were created as in the image of God, who is a spirit being. So we were created in spirit. Is that right?
Yes, and the best way to, if I'm a very visual person. I love visual art. So a good way to visualize is imagine. I like the images of mandalas, and they can even be AI generated, but they're beautiful to draw yourself, and they have a great harmony and also great complexity, and they're full of a rainbow of colors, but they're a very integrated image of energy. And I think those are beautiful visual for the idea of how we were created originally by God, which is as energy beings, and very beautiful energy beings with beautiful attributes. So another thing I should add is that masculine and feminine weren't separate. We were integrated in both our masculine and our feminine energies, values, outlooks, capabilities. So yeah, some of the writers who have interpreted the Cayce readings about this, the very early parts of creation, talk about it in a way that I interpret as a beautiful time of spontaneous ideas and creativity existing in light, in spirit, within forms of energy and between forms of energy. So very different from what we are now. But I think all of us on a spiritual path can hear that and be, I think, comforted by it, maybe inspired by it, and maybe also not surprised by it. Yeah.
I think a lot of us kind of sense that that's where we were, and maybe that's where we want to be again. But so what we're going to be talking about tonight is how did we get into this physical form,
Yes.
and possibly where we're going from here, but mostly how we got here. So Robyn, I know it's a long story. How did it happen?
Well, this is the interesting part. And we have to back up, first of all, to say, in Cayce's story, there's God the Father. And remember, these beings are not masculine or feminine. They're not male and female. This is Cayce's early 20th century language in a conservative Christian community in the South in your country. So a lot of the terms will be culture specific, but we would call this God the first cause. And God apparently desired companionship, and from God's self brought forth the Son, the only begotten Son, the first created Son. That is the Christ Spirit. So we often, in our Christian world or post-Jesus world, we think, oh, Jesus was the Christ and there's no Christ before that. In fact, Jesus embodied the Christ Spirit. But what it would appear from Cayce's story is that the Christ Son was highly creative and very affectionate. And the Christ Son's first idea was, I'm going to create more like me so that we have this whole family. We have this world of companionship. Again, still energetic, still beings in spirit, and still whole. Do you know those beautiful mandala images that I like to have? Beings of energy that's in balance, that's whole, that comprises the whole rainbow of colors of light. And apparently communing, almost you would say as thought beings, thought being to thought being, with creative ideas, loving ideas, whatever they think then manifests, and they all ooh and ah. You can sort of put your own spin on how it would have looked and felt, but those were then known as the sons of God. Now you could call them the children of God. Again, they're unisex, and I like to say that we have millennials coming back to using they as a singular personal pronoun, and it's not so weird when you look back to our divine origins. But these were the sons of God, and they were brought into being by the Creator Christ. The Son became the creative aspect of God from then on, and seems to have been, I don't think it would be far-fetched to characterize the original Christ Spirit as the creator, because he was the one interested in, let's be creative, let's create more like ourselves. And he created the sons of God. At the same time, so they're all like having a great time communing, he created alongside them the 7 archangels and their angelic hosts. And it's interesting that we have the 7 chakras, because it's probably not a stretch to equate the 7 archangels with each of a corresponding chakra. But each of the archangels then had their own divine angelic host. Again, all energy beings. But the first created of the archangels was Lucifer, which means child of light, and he was purported to be the most beautiful, Cayce says, of the ones created. And I think that's come down to us in various religious and mythic traditions, that Lucifer was very beautiful. The problem with Lucifer is that because God had created the Christ Spirit, the Son, with complete free will, because God had it, God, the first cause, had complete free will. The Son, the Creator, had complete free will. Everyone subsequently created, the sons of man, the archangels, the angelic hosts, all also had free will. This is where it gets difficult because Cayce doesn't go into detail and it can get frustrating. You know, you almost want to scope back into that reading room where Cayce's lying in trance and saying, you guys, ask him this, because there's details we don't have. Basically, Lucifer took his free will and rebelled against God. He got cranky. I mean, in a really exponential form of crankiness, and said, no, I don't want to be loving. No, I don't want to build bridges and be together. No, I don't want this togetherness. I want me. I want my ego. I want my choices. I want to do something different. I don't want to hang around here and not be in control. So there was something about the very principle of free will, I think we have to understand, that comes with a risk. We'll choose the opposite of what God would choose for us and would want for our highest, best selves. We have that freedom. So Lucifer basically said no. Now he's been created an archangel with an angelic host. What are they going to do? They follow him. And it's interesting, you know, in early literature, you can see that, for instance, you go to Milton and Milton's Paradise Lost, it just follows this narrative. Milton wrote about it beautifully. And all, you know, Lucifer and his fallen hosts. But once he decided to rebel, the high vibrations of the heavenly plane where the other souls existed, the other archangels and their hosts, the other sons of God, that was too high a vibration to sustain conflict. So once there's conflict, there became what, and we sometimes have heard of this in various myths, and it's actually referenced in the Bible almost glancingly, like, oh, you all know about this. Well, we don't, we've forgotten, but apparently they did originally. Soul history knows there was a war in heaven, and tradition says that the archangel Michael, who, you know, we see as the sort of the guardian warrior angel, he and his host drove Lucifer out of heaven with his cohort. And at that point, Christ Creator, who is an ultimately is the ultimate being of love, compassion, forgiveness, inclusivity. Christ Creator said, where are they going to go? What are we going to do? And Christ created at that point the world of matter. So that's when the earth came into being. And listen to the echoes, you know, in the creation story, and listen to the echoes in evolution, because as we go along, what we find is that there's divine intervention into the evolutionary story once it begins. And we're now talking about the first part of creating the world. And sorry, is there background? I think there's some feedback from somewhere. Sorry about that. So what happened is that Christ in compassion created the earth. And this is the point at which the earth came to being, and said, you guys who have fallen, Lucifer and your hordes, you go there. So he compassionately gave them a place to be and to work things out. And the whole idea was, you'll go to a place of a lower vibration, but the door is always open to evolve back to God. The door is also open because it's a material world, unfortunately, and they discovered this, where they can mess around. So what happened is they get into the material world, and it would appear, and this is borne out later, the material world, and we're all subject to this, it exerts the most incredible pull. Material appetites, you know, eating, drinking, touch, sex, power, money, acquisition, and just the experimentation that was available. Lucifer's hordes came to earth, which from the sounds of it was sort of, and this is where time, we have to assume that time is bendable. We can't conceptualize it as a straight line here, but on earth, evolution is progressing, thank you very much. And when they arrived, Cayce says, these who were still spirit beings, they made use of the extant human body of the day, which I take to mean however far early humanids had evolved, Lucifer's hordes, who we can now think of and call Satan, began to press into any physical form they encountered. And they had no sort of moral compass for how to do that, why to do it, when not to do it, when it might be a bad idea, what the consequences might be. They didn't seem to stop to consider. They were really driven by, I think, two things: curiosity. You know that old phrase, curiosity killed the cat. I think most cats are smarter than that, but as a saying, it's more likely about human beings. um, curious, so they're driven by curiosity, and by once you get into a body, it's, oh, I'm driven by appetite, and the original appetites are just for survival. You need to eat, you need to drink, you need to procreate, you need to survive. So all the actions of survival. And when you survive in a selfish way, that feeds into seeking power over others, going towards violence, going towards even reproduction can be going towards a violent dominant sort of act. Eating and drinking can become gluttony, can become addiction. And if you look at the depictions of now Satan's cohorts at this point, they are embodied in those old mythical forms. And Cayce says they were quite real at one time. We have them as mythic memory, and we're convinced they could never have existed. But Cayce says because spirit forms can press themselves into the physical by thought, and because they did it erroneously, greedily, without much forethought, just having a hurrah, hey, we're in party land, we've been set free. Think of teenagers in the rumpus room or having the bush party, right? And they ended up looking like a lot of those mythic beasts that are part animal, part bird, part human, maybe nothing that really looks appealingly human. So fawns, satyrs, centaurs, mermaids, mermen, harpies, the original sirens that tempted Ulysses in the story of Odysseus, the Odyssey, and his men to throw themselves into the sea and drown. The original harpies had the bodies of birds and heads of beautiful women, and they sang this siren song that convinced men that their heart's desire was to jump into the water. Well, they drowned. So that is a great story that characterizes both what the kind of bodies they took on and also what their behavior was like. So they seem to be, and I think now we would understand this in terms of human nature as narcissists and maybe psychopaths and sociopaths. They seem to feed on suffering and mess with other souls for the sake of dominance and creating suffering they could feed on. So kind of a messy world, right? And not an appealing one. Some of them, though, of course, they've come from spirit. They had superior spirit powers. And to the creatures then living on Earth, of course, they also split into male and female. They could do that. They could split themselves into actual male and female because they saw the physical world manifesting as male and female, mating, begetting, and they're like, yeah, yeehaw. But they didn't see that within a family structure with obligations and love and responsibility. They saw that as just more opportunity for power and mayhem. And so they split themselves into male and female, but also in these mixed species forms. And Cayce says their outer coverings, they could have had feathers, scales, skin, fur, the feet of animals, the feet of birds, wings, arms, many arms, everything was out of whack. And he said that also their skin would change according to the environment. So you can think of a chameleon, this is bizarre stuff, right? We're aware of it from the animal world, but Cayce says we're aware of it in the animal world. And that's sort of your living proof that these original fallen cohorts took the animal world and messed around and mixed it up for their own to have bodies. And really, if you look at the earliest and most honest depictions of those mythic creatures, especially in classical Greek art, they don't look happy. They are driven by appetite. They are usually solo, or they're dominating someone. They are using those who live on earth naturally as servants, slaves, objects to be used, just people to convert into their armies and benefit from. And
so they're not the sweet, like Walt Disney depictions of fauns and mermaids and all those, sweet, harmless
exactly,
creatures that we've seen in
exactly.
entertainment.
And that's an interesting thing in the progression of art history. What you see happening is post-Jesus, because we've become these compassionate, inclusive beings, or we head towards that in a post-Jesus world, in a world influenced by Jesus' thought and teachings. We look at those who are different with compassion. And so the depictions of those interspecies beings have become kind of benign, but that's not accurate historically. I love that we've done that because it shows the path we've been on, but it's not accurate to the origins. But so meanwhile, here we have these really lost cohorts. And by the way, once they're on Earth in these bastardized body forms, Cayce calls them the sons of Belial. And that's going to become interesting later, because he refers to the sons of Belial in the story of Jesus very specifically. But so we have the sons of God, who are the pure spirits who stay in heaven. And we have Lucifer and his cohorts who fell, came to earth. They go into these ugly body forms. They become the sons of Belial. And then we have the creator Christ, who's still the original son of God, who's still in heaven watching this going, But because earth was created as a place where you can also get back to heaven through choice, the divine souls in heaven were given to watch over earth and subtly and energetically influence the world, but without actually coming into the world physically, even in an energetic form. So there was a way that they could energetically, from a higher energy plane, influence some of the behavior so it didn't get chaotically out of hand, just hopeless mess. That said, there became then a wave of souls from heaven, the sons of God, who are given the choice. If you want to go into the physical world, experience the physical plane, and ascend through it back to God, now that that choice has been taken on by Lucifer, you all get to have that choice. The choice became, egalitarian. Yeah, you can do it too if you want to. But then we go back to the terrible pull of the physical, right? And so these souls who are watching go, hey, yeah, I want to jump in.
So now the motivation for jumping in is kind of mixed now. It's partly to go and help we're looking at these beings that are stuck now on the material plane. And we're saying, this is a mess. Maybe we could be helpful. But there's also being somewhat intrigued with materiality. As you say, the pull of materiality.
And I think it's the pull, I have to say, I think, and this comes from observing and reading so many past lives for people and watching how we evolve and what we get into and where we make errors and where we progress. And I think it's the pull, not just of curiosity about that, but the pull of the journey itself, Lynne. The attractiveness of the journey. Nobody recognizes how darn hard it's going to be once you get here. Right. So I think the choice to incarnate at that point, or to come to earth, was innocent. They weren't the fallen hordes of Lucifer. They fell, but their fall was more innocent. They said, yeah, let's jump in. I'm really curious. I've got the choice. And then the appetites, the selfishness, the ego, they turn out to be things that are really hard to balance. And I say balance because in this plane, we need the ego to help us navigate, but it has to be balanced with our soul and our higher self. And the job of balancing those became difficult. So they too began to fall in the sense of making wrong choices, selfish choices, isolating choices, and building up their own bad karma, which of course Lucifer's hordes have the original terrible karma, right? And so this is the next wave of souls who came into the earth plane, also into these mixed, messed up bodies. It's interesting. I want to cut away here and tell a story. Frank and Nancy Thomas were among the very early bringers of Edgar Cayce to Canada, to my country. And Frank was an expert past life regressionist. He told a story about regressing a man who described his body. This is at the time of early Atlantis, and Atlantis lasted a long time. Early Atlantis. And he's describing his body, and he goes down, and from the top he's female, and he's a nanny. He's a nanny to someone in a privileged household in Atlantis. But as he gets to his waist and down, he's got hairy legs, he's got hocks, he's got cloven feet. And he recognized that in that life he was a she, but she was a fawn. But that fawn was in a benign role. Do you see? So probably that particular soul was one of the fallen sons of God who were given to watch over the earth, where Lucifer, Satan, and the cohorts were trying to work things through and making a mess of it. And yet they seem to have come in with still some of that altruism up top, front and center. So
Right.
they were capable of those more compassionate and caring characteristics. But so we've still got the Christ spirit and the original sons of God up in heaven, we'll say the higher vibrational plane. It's not literally up, it's energetically higher vibration.
Right.
And Jesus is watching and seeing, okay, so the watchers of earth are now getting into trouble. And so this is the point at which the Christ spirit itself says, the creator, the original creator says, everybody's getting into trouble. And the Christ spirit decides to descend in vibration into the material physical world at that time and bring with him, and Cayce says him, but again, these are, unisex beings,
Right.
with him, a cohort of souls, and their only purpose, their sole purpose, is to incarnate, to come to this physical plane, not yet to incarnate literally, but to come to this physical plane with the pure mission of helping the others find their way back to God.
So they're missionaries.
In a sense, and they're rescuers. They're really on a
Right.
rescue mission, right?
Right.
And that's the goal. And what's interesting is that they never lost sight of the goal. But Cayce says even Emilius, who was the name of this soul, and by the way, they came as thought forms only, says Cayce, and their manner of movement was more like the amoeba. So when they found themselves in the physical plane, the only way they could move by projection of thought was more like the flowing movement of amoeba, but that's the flowing movement of energy within a physical plane. And the amoeba, they tend to move somewhat sluggishly because they have to flow to move. And I think the reference from Cayce probably is apt, because I would imagine that the earth plane, feeling quite a bit denser than the higher divine plane, would feel heavy to them, and their movement would feel slow by comparison.
Right.
But Cayce says, and this Christ being, once come to earth in an energetic form, was called Emilius, and he was known as Emilius, and he chose to come to Atlantis. And I wonder, Cayce again, this is where the Cayce record has holes in it. And you just go, why didn't someone ask? But I think we have to be respectful of the cultural context and the complete lack of any prior knowledge around this kind of esoterica, which it would have seemed at the time. So they wouldn't necessarily know what to ask, do you know?
Right.
They're already
Right.
dealing with, hey, this guy's channeling stuff. We're not even sure how do you treat a channeler or the entity he's channeling.
Right.
For
It was
me,
all pretty amazing to these people, to the people around Cayce and to Cayce himself.
yeah.
It was hard. It was hard for them to deal with, actually.
And
Yeah.
I think also maybe a little bit scary. Because
Scary.
notice sometimes the manner in which they spoke to Cayce once in trance, spoke to that which spoke through him, was very much to give orders. You will now do this. You will now do. And I feel like that's coming from fear. And in my experience, spirit is expansive and has a fabulous sense of humor. And there's nothing to be afraid of if it's a pure spirit being channeled. And you don't have to order it around. This is access to higher wisdom. But I kind of look at the ordering and that you will do this now and you will give information about that. And I think, ooh, this is kind of neophytes trying to deal with something pretty big and scary. And that aside, they still got so much rich information for us, didn't they? Yeah.
Absolutely.
But the record is sketchy when it comes, all it says is Amelius II fell to temptation once he was here and made errors. So again, error, is sort of the watchword of being in this plane. And I think that's why in spiritual understanding, we've come to respect that error is how we learn. We progress through error, through trial and error. And we make a choice. It turns out badly. It feels bad. It creates mayhem. We come to some awareness of why the choice was bad. We can make a better choice. And that's called working through your karma, essentially. But this wave of souls, if you want to think of how they might have operated in the earth and still operate to this day. By the way, they became called the first wave of souls who were watchers, who then got a bit too intrigued and got mixed up in the earth themselves. They came to be called the sons of man. They went from being sons of God who were watchers to becoming sons of man, who also were trapped on earth but weren't quite as bad as, the sons of Belial. Well, I should say the Christ spirit who would become Jesus came as Amelius with his cohorts, and they were called the sons of God still. So they were originally sons of God in heaven, and when they came to earth with this mission, they remained sons of God. And I found it very interesting because maybe about 3 times in my reading practice, looking at past lives and present lives, I've become aware I'm in the presence of a soul who comprised one of the original sons of God. They're just such darn good people. And you look back in their lives and you just don't see a lot of crap. You see the normal human error and progression through lifetimes, but you just see a capacity for focusing on a higher cause. And that's what Amelius and his second wave of souls brought into the earth plane. But one thing Amelius saw was that if we're going to progress, if we're going to deal with our karma, we're going to have whole new physical bodies. And that's where the whole idea to create Homo sapiens, Cayce says that's when Homo sapiens was created as an actual divine act. So you can sort of think of evolution as going along. And Cayce says, you hear the biblical creation story, understand those 6 days as eons of evolution. But there are points where the divine finger comes in and sort of sets things to rights a little bit, or sets things in motion in a slightly different or better direction. And here Amelius and his crew, still in an energetic form, but present on Earth in Atlantis, decide to create a new physical container, because all these souls are stuck having to die out of these ugly bodies to even escape the physical at all. So death becomes the only escape out of bodies these spirit forms have become stuck in. And Jesus says, okay, if we have to evolve in bodies and cycles of death and rebirth, we have to have a better container. And I started to say, I suspect Jesus chose Atlantis because that's where souls were discovering they could split themselves into male and female. And they found the female form, Cayce says this, they found the female form a little more attractive and more balanced, the female entity, and it was a bit more appealing to the souls coming from the higher plane. But they seemed to like the idea of companionship, romance, sex, and the whole gamut of relational soul development you go through when you're male and female, or maybe other genders, because we know those are ancient and traditional as well, once you're in relationship. And I suspect that Amelius came to Atlantis, the Christ spirit came to Atlantis, very interested in the progress of male and female. And I say that based on the fact that Amelius creates this new body. And then what does the Christ spirit do for the Christ spirit's next incarnation? The next incarnation that Cayce tells us about anyway is as Adam. And in another place, Cayce says that Adam and Eve were one soul that had split. So, you know, you extrapolate from that. What have we got? We've got the Christ spirit in Eve and the Christ spirit in Adam, right? And those were the first Homo sapiens on the planet. And it's well known to evolutionary scientists, archaeologists, we've never found, there is a missing link between the early hominids and their development and Homo sapiens. They cannot pinpoint the bridge species. And in fact, Cayce would say that's because there wasn't one. This is where divine beings from a higher plane said, you guys now in the meat, incarnated, literally in meat, are messed up, and you need a new suit of clothes, you know, a new body. And that's going to be what we now call Homo sapiens. And that was divinely created. And I love that Cayce's readings really wax poetic. You know how Cayce's readings can get very poetic at times. And you know, there's a high spiritual vibration around what Cayce's talking about, or the source is talking about in that moment. And the description of this creating of a new vessel for humankind, for the souls of humankind to find their way back to God. Apparently there's all this, it's almost given in terms of music and song. And I think we can understand that the creation of the new body came about through vibrations that were almost beautiful orchestral sounds. And there was a lot of celebration in heaven, celebration amongst Amelius and his wave of sons of God who were in Atlantis, and just a huge celebration of this rich creativity which brought about the male and female human body as we know it now. And yeah,
this is where the morning stars sang together.
Yes, the morning stars
sang together.
Yeah, and a celebration for a new vessel, for the incoming of humankind, and for them to find their way back to God. And I think that's the key. If you go back to the very beginning, where the Christ Spirit created the material world for the fallen sons of the hosts of Lucifer, that material world was never out of reach of divine light, of divine influence. And that meant the door is always open back to God. And that's
the task. it seems the task is to live a fully spiritual life as a spiritual being in the material world. That it seems to me that's the assignment, which is a very difficult assignment. Yeah.
It is. And what I love about Cayce's outline is that even the Christ spirit fell when he got here. We're not alone. And we can't live and suffer anything that the spirit who ultimately became Jesus didn't live, suffer, experience, and know either from the inside or intimately through his beloveds, his friends, his crowd, his community that he brought with him. So because the Son created enlarged bits of self to be companions that then came to earth, fell, got involved, he feels with us, every one of us. And I find that incredibly comforting, but also I think when we're at our darkest is when we feel most alone. And this story reminds us that when we're at our darkest and feel most alone, even when we're at our darkest, the Creator has been there. The Creator is still there with us. It's just that in our darkest places, we forget. We're prone to forgetting. And that's part of the incarnational experience, isn't it? We forget. And culturally, we're not taught to remember. There's a lot of stories now. I love it on social media, people who follow children who remember and talk about their previous
Yes.
lives, eh? And I love those because, you know, they're always accurate. Those kids are too little to make it up. They actually remember. And I love that we're beginning to open up to listening to those kids and integrating, yeah, that's who you were, you know, but you're here now. And it's ultimately a hopeful story, even though it's all based on errors, bad choices, but it comes from the beautiful place of I love you and trust you enough to give you full freedom of choice. So that's a beautiful blessing of creation, but you're right, it comes with huge difficulties because we have to develop the willpower to make the good choices. And that only comes through karmic journeying through life after life, you know. Although, as I say, I think the original sons of God who came with Emilius, they have a higher tendency not to fall very far or very hard, you know, and it still shows.
But it is interesting if you go into the past life readings that in some cases you will see where someone who's one of the sons of God actually messed up and they made big mistakes and fell further
Yes.
and
Yes.
had to therefore now has further to try to come back. And sometimes the sons of Belial had a change of heart and did good things, and
Yeah.
were helpful to others and so forth, showed compassion and that sort of thing. So
that's right. And actually it would be the sons of man, as they were called, the sons of God who fell first, that first wave, they would be the ones who messed up maybe more than the sons of God who were the second wave that came with Emilius. So yeah, there were always degrees, but again, there's always that place, that access back to God. And I think you remember from my talk, there's an image, you know, that old image showing the progression of early humanoids and humanids until they get to Homo sapiens.
right.
And I found a wonderful image of that progression of the human body. It's always shown as male. And then the great picture by Michelangelo of God in the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, reaching out, you know, that finger to this sort of lethargic finger of Adam to
Right.
bring Adam to life. But in this image, the finger of God is reaching to this progression of human bodies. And really it's saying, you are able to evolve back. And that's exactly like you say. The sons of Belial can have a huge awakening. I would say it's more likely to happen over many lifetimes, you know. But what I've seen from my psychic practice, and especially reading past lives, is that if I were to typify Amelius's group of souls who came in, probably we would call them the teachers, those who exemplify, the mentors, the teachers, those who live as models and examples of how to live a better life, those who encourage and uplift others, those who stand for education, enlightenment, inclusivity. And I believe that that group of souls will always be found to have influenced, whether it's a son of Belial or a son of man, in their sudden progression to a higher awareness again, you know? So
Mhm.
mission of the Amelia's souls, I think we see to this day in those we most respect as spiritual teachers, enlightened leaders. They may be politicians, they may be a teacher at your high school or public school, they may be a counselor, they may be a minister, they may just be the guy who fixes your drains, but just has a way about him that makes you feel good, and he can say the right thing at the right time, you know? Or the
Right,
mechanic who fixes your car, but she makes you feel like your life's getting fixed too. I,
right.
I think it's a vibration they carry with them, you know? And that's why I think it's so wonderful to know this story. We can begin to look at our world in an expanded way, can't we?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
This new body then that was created, um, not only were the appendages, the tails, the feathers, the fur, and everything eliminated, but this body that's a new design, right? That was created to enable spiritual development
Yes.
in the physical plane. Is that would you agree with that?
Absolutely. And, you know, I haven't touched on this and I didn't mention it in my talk, but I think you brought it up earlier. You know, it came in as the five, what Cayce calls the five root races. So there was a brown atom, a black atom. We use these terms, they're kind of disrespectful and diminishing now. The white atom, the red atom, the yellow atom, right? The five root races. And I really feel that in terms of an original atom in each of the five root races and an original being, we have to assume that the Christ spirit was embodied in each of the root races.
That's an interesting point because yes, the readings talk about a 5-point projection of this uh, atom into 5 different locations and 5 different races. And some people think that what that means is that Amelius was one of those atoms and some of his followers were the others. And other people think that Amelius actually split into 5 souls in these 5 different locations. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, I don't think there's actually, if you go back, I don't think there's actually conflict between either version because the first and only begotten Son, the Christ Spirit, who was the Son of the first cause, the Father God, then divided himself into all the hosts of heaven for companionship. So, who are we really? We've all come from Christ. We're going back to Christ. And
Right.
so
So dividing into
we're free to see it either way. And I think if we go back to the origin, we can understand why either can be seen as possibly accurate, you know?
so so dividing into 5 beings wouldn't be any big challenge if you could, if he or he she initially divided into all those souls. The other thing is the chakra system the new
Yes.
body has built in.
Yes, and I like that there's 7 chakras, there's 7 orders of archangels, and I really feel that part of the way the body was balanced was that the chakra system could be in alignment and could provide rebalancing in the physical world when we got out of balance through divine energy entering through the chakras. Now, of course, people had to be taught how to meditate, how to pray, how to receive divine energy through the chakras, but that would rebalance us. And the new body seems to have been calibrated to have those 7 spiritual centers where we could continuously rebalance when we got out of balance. And I love the beauty of that design. Imagine the creativity in that design, you know, and imagine the lack of cohesive capacity to absorb divine energy in those mixed species bodies that the sons of Belial and the sons of man got messed up in.
Mhm.
You know, there'd be no capacity for balance. So, yeah, although Cayce says Emilius erred, he didn't fail his mission. You know, he and his second wave of souls created this new body, which really is, you know, day 5.5, it's the second half of day 6 of creation.
Right.
And that's when the human body, as we know it, is made. And yes, it's obviously a much more poetic vessel than has existed before, and ready then for the Christ Spirit to incarnate into that vessel and really go to town to help us through multiple incarnations, you know. And Cayce says there were 30, as many as 30 lifetimes before we get to Jesus. But, you know, they ran the gamut through. Cayce mentions there was Emilius and then Adam. And then, I want to get them, I don't want them out of order. Then Joshua, who helped reestablish the Jewish scripture and establish the worship of one God when they escaped from Egypt. The children of Israel escaped from Egypt. Then Joshua, who is Moses' right hand. These are all incarnations of ultimately the Jesus Spirit, the Christ soul. And you remember Joshua, you know, the Battle of Jericho, they used sound, vibration to knock down the walls, which is genius. It's kind of nonviolent. The one I love is Joseph. He then incarnated as Joseph of the Joseph in the Technicolor dream coat.
Right.
We have a whole musical about Joseph and Jesus, and they're the same soul. And then he became Zend, who was actually the father of Zoroaster, and Zoroastrian again is worships one God, the concept of one God. And
Robyn,
then
Robyn,
we can
Robyn,
go on, but we have
yes,
to stop here.
and I definitely want
Anyway,
to.
yeah.
I want to do a show about the different incarnations of that soul,
Cool.
Emilius, who ultimately was Jesus. But we kind of have to wind down now. So, so
Yeah, it's rich material. It could go on very much longer, but
I know. So for our audience, if people want to reach you for a psychic reading or to have you be a speaker or presenter for them, how could people reach you?
by far the best is by email. And I have a simple Gmail account, robynmariebutt@gmail.com, ROBYNMAREBUTT@gmail.com. And I book people through that email account. I think if people are interested in this content, I'll also refer people to the Creative Soul magazine, which I and a colleague, Mark Finnan, create, and it's up online for free. And the subtitle, it's called The Creative Soul, a Poet, a Playwright, and Edgar Cayce. And a lot of the material we've talked about today is available in issues of that magazine that are free online. So if you Google The Creative Soul and Cayce, it'll bring you to that address.
Great. And if people want to contact me, my name is Lynne Miceli, and I can be reached through the ARE of New York, which is, the email is info@edgarcaycenyc.org. But I'm going to spell that for you because Cayce is not the way you might expect. It's info, INFO, at EDGARCAYCENYC.org. So thank you, Robyn. This has been fascinating. And I know there's so much more to talk about. And I definitely want you to come back and talk about it again another time.
Thank you, Lynn. It's just been a delight. It's wonderful stuff to share, and we owe it to Cayce and his companions and supporters. So thank you, and thank you to the ARE in New York and everywhere.
And thank you to Hercules for having us both.
And
Thank
thanks
you,
to both
Hercules.
of you. It's been decades since I dove into these waters. So thank you for the refresher. Just a very quick aside, from an Olympian perspective, the Olympians are still around and they have quite a different interpretation about what was happening during those times. And the creatures that you're describing, the centaurs, the mermaids, and so forth, they're still around. And they're still seen in Greece, but not only in Greece, but here. So they're not totally physical. They can become physical, but they're still very much around as well.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
both.
Thank you
Bye-bye.
both. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.